The last thing I saw was my son moving among the trash. Then darkness took me. I fainted, wishing I had died with him. 20 years later, he came back. But not the way I imagined. Hello, my dears. How are you all doing? I hope you're well. May God bless you always. My name is Agnes Parker. I'm 74 years old, and today I'm here to share with you a story I've carried in my heart for many years. I was born in Meridian, Mississippi, in a very different time from today, and I still live here in this small town that watched me grow up. You know, now in my old age, I spend most of my days tending to my garden here in my backyard. Every morning, when the sun is still gentle, I go out with my old watering can, which my son gave me about 10 years ago, and water my plants. I have tomatoes, lettuce, kale, bell peppers, and some herbs I use to make tea. It brings me such peace, you know? Seeing those little seeds I planted becoming food, becoming life. I started working on this garden when my son bought this house for me in 2005. Before that, I'd never had a little piece of land that was just mine, so when I saw that empty backyard, I thought, Agnes, you're going to make something grow here. And look, my dears, what a joy it is. Every day I harvest something for lunch. Just yesterday I picked some beautiful tomatoes, bright red and sweet, to make sauce for spaghetti. Where I spend most of my time is simple, but it's my little corner. There's a small wooden table where I clean the vegetables, an old white plastic chair where I sit to rest when the sun gets too hot, and a long planter bed that I made myself, stacking bricks left over from a neighbor's construction. The plants are lined up like little soldiers, each in its proper place. You know, folks, before I really start my story, I want to make a special request of you watching. If you like what you hear here, don't forget to hit that like button down below, okay? And subscribe to the channel too, because that really helps me continue telling these stories to you. It makes me so happy knowing you're on the other side listening. And you, my dear friends watching me now, tell me here in the comments, what town are you watching from? And what time of day did you find this video? In the morning with your coffee, after lunch, or in the evening? I always read all the comments and get so emotional knowing where you're from and when you take time out of your day to listen to this grandma's stories. Tell me, will you? Let's create a chain of kindness here from Mississippi. Look, my children, the story I'm going to tell you isn't easy. It's about a time in my life I'd rather have forgotten, but that also made me the person I am today. It's about how sometimes life tests us in ways we think we can't bear. But in the end, God has plans we don't understand at the time. You're going to hear about a 12-year-old girl, that was me, who went through trials no child should face. You'll meet people who did terrible things, and you'll see how life has a very particular way of settling accounts. It's a story that involves a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, but also shows how hope can be born even in the darkest places. So get ready, my dears, because I'm taking you back to 1963, when I was still a little girl living in a small wooden shack here in Meridian, in a time when the world was very different from today. It was a harder time, where children grew up too fast, and certain things happened that we can't even imagine today. My dears, I'm taking you now to 1963, when I was only 12 years old and lived in a situation you can't even imagine today. Back then, here in Meridian, life was very different. The city was growing, lots of people coming from elsewhere, but it still had that small-town feel where everyone knew each other and families lived crowded together in the poorest neighborhoods. I lived in a shack made of old wood and rusted tin, in what today is the East Side neighborhood, but back then it was just woods and a few scattered houses. Our house was tiny, with only 2 rooms. One that served as bedroom, kitchen, and living room all together, and another small back room where my father, Gerald, kept his tools. Gerald worked as a construction worker when jobs came up, but spent more time drinking whiskey at Mr. Wilson's bar than actually working. My father was a tall man, thin as a rail, always with stubble and yellowish eyes from so much drinking. He had big, calloused hands, and when he got angry, which was almost every day, those hands were heavy on us. He was in his early 40s, but looked older, bent by problems and drink. He was a bitter man, always complaining about life, saying the world had been unfair to him. My brother Bobby was 5 years older than me, a strapping 17-year-old strong as a bull. He'd taken after our father in his rough manner and laziness, too. Didn't like to work, spent all day loafing around town, getting into trouble with other boys and only coming home for dinner. He had dark eyes, always with that kind of sneaky look that made me uncomfortable, and a crooked smile that meant nothing good. My mother had died when I was very small, from a fever she got after my baby brother was stillborn. I barely remember her, just some blurry flashes of a long-haired woman rocking me. Since then, it was just me, my father, and my brother in that cramped little house, living however we could. Our routine was always the same. I'd wake up very early before sunrise to fetch water from Mr. Johnson's well, which was about 5 houses down. I'd carry 2 small buckets, one at a time, because I didn't have the strength to carry both together. Then I'd make weak coffee for the 3 of us and heat up whatever food was left from the night before, when there was anything left. In the morning, while my father went out looking for work and my brother disappeared around town, I stayed taking care of the house. I swept the dirt floor with an old broom made of dried branches, washed dishes in a dented aluminum basin, and tried to deal with the mess they made. I didn't go to school because my father said, "Girls don't need education, just need to know how to cook and clean house." Our lot was small, fenced with old boards my father had scavenged. Behind the house was a small yard where I tried to grow vegetables, tomatoes, lettuce, kale, but the soil was poor and almost nothing grew right. Still, I persisted, because anything that grew there was extra food on our table. The other neighborhood kids didn't play much with me. I think their parents told them not to mix with Gerald's daughter, because everyone knew my father was trouble. Still, sometimes I played with Zelda, who lived 3 houses up, and with Victor, a boy my age who had come from Alabama with his family. We'd play hopscotch in the dirt, or hide and seek among the trees, or pick fruit from the apple tree at Mr. Thompson's house. But the hardest part of my childhood, my dears, began when I turned about 10. That's when my brother Bobby started paying different attention to me. At first it was just strange looks, then comments I didn't really understand. He'd say things like, "You're becoming a young lady, Agnes," or, "Pretty soon you'll be a beautiful woman." I didn't like it. It left me with a bad feeling in my stomach. My father never paid attention to anything that happened at home. He'd come home drunk, eat dinner in silence, and sleep snoring loud as an old tractor. On weekends, when there was no work, he'd drink from early on and complain about everything, the food, the house, me, the whole world. On those days, I preferred to go out on the street and only come back when it got dark. We owed money everywhere. At Mr. Wilson's general store, at Mrs. Crawford's pharmacy, at Mr. Osborne's bakery. My father always promised to pay when he got a good job, but the work that came up was scarce and poorly paid. Many times we'd go to bed with just a plate of watery rice and a piece of boiled potato. It was around that time I began to notice that some things in our house weren't the way they should be. My brother would watch me when I bathed in the back room, peeking through the cracks in the boards. When I complained, he'd say I was being silly, that he hadn't seen anything. But I knew he had. And that's how my 12th birthday came, on a hot afternoon in December 1963, when everything changed forever in my life. It was on a December night, right before Christmas 1963, that my life changed forever, my dears. I had just turned 12 and still played with dolls when I didn't have housework to do. Back then, we grew up slowly. Didn't know about the evils of the world like kids today do. I remember it like it was yesterday. My father had gone out drinking at his buddy's house and said he wouldn't be back until the next day. It was a hot night, one of those December nights in Mississippi where even the crickets stay quiet from the heat. I was in the back room trying to sleep on an old mat when my brother Bobby came home earlier than usual. "Agnes," he called me softly. "Come here. I brought something for you." I got up, curious, thinking it might be some candy or fruit he'd picked up somewhere. But when I got to the living room, I saw his eyes were different, kind of glazed, and he smelled strongly of whiskey. He had an expression on his face I'd never seen before, a look that made me want to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. "You're a young lady now, aren't you, Agnes?" he said, coming closer. "It's time you learned some things. I won't tell the details of what happened that night, my dears, because some pains are too great to be shared. What I can say is that when the sun rose the next day, I was no longer the same girl. Something inside me had broken forever, like a clay pot that falls on the floor and is never the same again, even if you gather all the little pieces. My brother looked at me before going out and said a phrase that was burned into my soul like a branding iron. "If you tell anyone, I'll kill you. And Dad will help me because no one will believe a lying girl like you." I spent the following days like a ghost around the house. I couldn't eat right. Everything made me nauseous. I couldn't sleep because every time I closed my eyes, I went back to that terrible night. And the worst part is that it wasn't just once. Every time my father left the house for a few hours, my brother would come back with that look, and I knew what was going to happen. "It's our little secret," he'd say afterwards. "You like it, don't you, Agnes? That's why you don't tell anyone." But I didn't like it. God knows I didn't like it. I cried in hiding, washed myself with cold water trying to feel clean again, prayed to Our Lady to protect me. But it seemed like even God wasn't listening to me in those dark days. The months passed, and around March 1964, I began to notice something was different about my body. My belly, which had always been flat, was starting to grow slowly. At first I thought it was from not eating right. Sometimes I'd go days with just a handful of flour and sugar water. But when May came and my belly kept growing, even a 12-year-old girl like me could understand what was happening. I had seen other pregnant women in the neighborhood, knew what it looked like when there was a baby growing inside a mother's belly. The despair that took hold of me, my dears, has no words to describe. I was a child expecting another child, not really understanding how that had happened, only knowing that if my father found out, he'd kill me for real. And my brother kept doing those things to me, even seeing my belly grow, as if nothing had changed. I started wearing my father's clothes over my skirt, huge shirts that hid my body. Said I was cold, even in the Mississippi heat. I worked hunched over, always sideways, so no one would notice the change. When neighbor women came to talk, I'd run inside the house. Mrs. Olson, the midwife of the area, lived about 6 houses down from ours. Sometimes I'd pass in front of her house and imagine if she could help me. But how was a 12-year-old girl going to explain to a respected lady that she was expecting a baby? And what if she told my father? And what if she asked whose child it was? These questions spun in my head day and night. I prayed for it all to be just a nightmare, to wake up one day and discover none of it had happened. But my belly kept growing, and no matter how hard I tried to hide it, it got harder and harder. In September, at the very end of the pregnancy, I had my first strong pain. I was washing clothes in the yard when I felt like someone had stuck a knife in my belly and twisted it. I held onto the clothesline to keep from falling, bit my lip until it bled to keep from screaming. The pain passed, but I knew I didn't have much time left. It was in the early hours of an October morning in 1964 that it all happened. My father and brother had gone to a wedding party at some relative's house and said they'd only be back the next day. I was alone when the pains started for real, one after another, getting stronger and stronger. There was no one to help me. I managed to get some old towels and water in a basin. The pains were terrible, like my body was going to split in half. I bit a piece of cloth to keep from screaming and waking the neighborhood. For hours, I was like that, alone, scared, a 12-year-old girl going through the hardest experience of a woman's life. When the baby was born, I cried with relief and terror at the same time. It was a tiny boy, but healthy, crying loudly. For a moment, looking at that perfect little face, I felt a love so great it hurt in my chest. But soon after came the panic. What was I going to do? How was I going to explain? How was I going to raise a child being a child myself? I cleaned the boy with a towel, wrapped him in a diaper I'd secretly made from an old sheet. He stopped crying and stared at me with those dark little eyes, as if asking, "Mama, what's going to happen to me?" And it was at that moment, my dears, that I heard the sound that made my blood run cold. The voices of my father and brother arriving home earlier than they'd said. The baby started crying again, and I knew my life, and his, was over. My baby's cry echoed through the small house like a cry for help that no one would answer. I heard voices approaching, heavy footsteps on the dirt floor, and my heart almost stopped beating. I picked up my son in my arms, pressed him against my chest, and tried to think of a lie, an excuse, anything that could explain that situation. But when my father and brother appeared at the door of the little room, drunk with red eyes, I knew there was no explanation in the world that would save us. "What's that noise, Agnes?" my father asked, stumbling. His voice came out slurred, mixed with the strong smell of whiskey that permeated his clothes. When he saw the little bundle in my arms, his face changed completely. The drunkenness seemed to have vanished instantly, as if someone had thrown cold water on his head. "What is that you're holding?" It's a baby, Dad," I managed to whisper, trembling like a leaf in the wind. My voice came out so quiet you could barely hear it. Bobby came closer, his eyes glued to the cloth bundle I was holding. You could see his mind working, calculating, understanding what had happened. When he looked at me, his eyes had an expression I'll never forget, a mixture of anger, fear, and something that almost seemed like satisfaction, as if he was pleased to see I'd gotten into worse trouble than him. "Where did this child come from, Agnes? How did a baby appear here inside the house?" I couldn't answer. Words had died in my throat, choked with so much fear. The baby cried louder and louder, as if sensing the danger surrounding us, as if knowing those men meant nothing good for him. My father snatched the child from my arms with a brutality that made me scream. I grabbed his fist, tried to stop him, but he pushed me away like I was a bothersome insect. He examined the boy's little face, held him like he was just some object, without any affection, no tenderness. The baby writhed in those thick arms, crying even more desperately. "Answer now, you wretch!" he yelled, shaking me by the shoulders with his free hand. "Who's the father of this child? How did you end up in this situation?" I looked at my brother, searching for some sign, some clue of what he was thinking. Bobby stared at me fixedly and shook his head almost imperceptibly, his eyes sending a clear message. "If you open your mouth, you die." I remembered the threats, the words he'd told me. No one would believe a lying girl like me. And even if they did believe me, what would they do? What would happen to our family? How was I going to raise this child alone, being underage, without money, without anything? I don't know, Dad," I lied, feeling each word come out of my mouth like chewed glass. It was a boy from town. I don't even really know his name. It only happened once." The lie came out of me as if it were true, because at that moment I needed to protect my son any way I could. I thought if I made up a story, maybe they'd accept the child. Maybe they'd let me raise my boy in peace. Maybe they'd even feel sorry for me, a girl who'd been deceived by some shameless boy. But I was wrong, very wrong. "A bastard," my father spat the words like poison, shaking the baby carelessly. "You brought a bastard into my house. You know what situation we're in? You know how much money we owe?" He started pacing around the small house, gesturing with one hand and holding my son with the other, in an agitation that terrified me. "Mr. Wilson is charging for the drinks. Mrs. Crawford wants the money for medicines. Mr. Osborne won't give credit anymore. We owe the whole town, going through hardship like street dogs, and you come bringing me another mouth to feed." "Dad, please," I begged, getting up from the bed, stumbling, still sore from the recent birth. I stretched my trembling arms toward my son, trying to get closer. "I'll work more. I'll do anything you tell me. I'll stay up all night collecting things to sell. But let him stay. He's small, eats little, won't be any trouble." "Won't be any trouble?" Bobby gave a dry laugh, a joyless guffaw that echoed off the wooden walls of the house. Children are always trouble, Agnes. And expensive too. Milk, diapers, medicine when they get sick. And we can't even support the three of us. Imagine one more. It was then that my father stopped walking and stared at my brother. The two exchanged a look that lasted a few seconds, but to me seemed like an eternity. In that silent look, I could see they were communicating, deciding something, reaching an agreement without needing to say a word. And whatever it was they were deciding, I knew it wasn't going to be good. "Put on some clothes and come with us," my father ordered after this mute conversation, turning to me with an expression I'd never seen before on his face. "Where? What are you going to do with him?" I asked, trying to fully get up from the bed, but my legs barely supported me. The pain of childbirth was still very fresh, and I felt like my whole body was going to split in half. "Don't ask questions, just obey." I managed to put on an old dress over my blood-stained nightgown, my hands shaking so much I could barely button the buttons. My body hurt everywhere, my legs seemed made of jelly, and when I tried to approach to get my son back, Bobby pushed me away so hard I almost fell on the floor. "Walk in front," he said, pointing to the door. "And don't try anything funny, or it'll be much worse for you and the boy." The threat in his voice was clear. If I tried to run, if I screamed for help, if I did anything they didn't like, my baby would pay the price. We left the house in a silent and terrible procession. My father went in front, carrying my baby like a sack of potatoes, swinging him carelessly as he walked. Me behind, stumbling with each step, trying not to faint from pain and fear, forcing myself not to fall. Bobby closed the line, watching me as if I were going to try to escape at any moment. The night was dark, with just a sliver of moon in the sky, and the silence of the early morning was broken only by my son's desperate crying and the sound of our steps on the dry earth. The neighborhood dogs barked from time to time, but no lights came on in the houses. Everyone was sleeping, oblivious to the drama happening right there, just a few feet from their beds. We walked toward the back of our property, where there was a vacant lot that stretched as far as the eye could see. It was a place forgotten by God and men, where nothing grew right and there was only tall weeds, trash people threw there, construction debris, broken glass, and accumulated filth. People used it as a dump for everything that was no good anymore. Old furniture, flat tires, leftover building materials. When I realized where they were taking me, when I understood what the destination of this walk was, my blood froze in my veins. "No, Dad, please don't do this." I started crying, trying to stop walking. "I beg you, for the love of God, for my mother's soul, don't do such a thing." But they didn't hear me, or pretended not to hear. They kept walking, dragging me along, until they reached right in the middle of the vacant lot, where the trash was densest and the weeds grew tallest. In the middle of that desolate scene, my father stopped and looked at me. His face was hard, expressing no emotion, as if made of stone. "Here," he said, holding the child out to me. "Leave him here and let's go." "No!" I screamed with all my strength, trying to run to get my son, but I could barely stand. "I won't do it! You can't make me! He's my son!" It was then that my brother grabbed me by both arms, squeezing so hard I felt my skin burn under his fingers. "You will do it," he whispered in my ear, his voice loaded with threat. "If you don't do it the easy way, you'll do it the hard way. And you know what that means." And when I hesitated, when I tried to break free, when I desperately stretched my arms toward my crying baby, I felt a pain in the side of my body that made me double over. Then another, and another. "Take the child and put him on the ground. Now," my father repeated, his voice cold as ice. I didn't want to. My whole being screamed no, that it was wrong, that a mother doesn't abandon her child, that I'd rather die than do that. But between the pains in my body, the weakness from the recent birth, and the threats from the two men in my family, I had no choice. I had no strength to fight, nowhere to run, no one in the world who could help me. With hands trembling like leaves in the wind, I picked up my boy in my arms one last time. I looked carefully at that perfect little face, felt the good baby smell, the small and fragile warmth of his body against my chest. For a second, I thought about running, screaming for help with all the strength of my lungs, fighting to the death to protect my child. But I was alone. I was a 12-year-old girl, without strength, without money, without family to support me, without anyone in the world who could or would help me. The last thing I saw was my son moving among the trash, I whispered to myself as I placed him on the dirty ground, among the debris and garbage. The baby kept crying, looking for me with his closed little eyes, moving his tiny hands as if calling me back. Then darkness took me. I fainted, wishing I had died with him. The last thing I remember is falling to my knees on that filthy ground, hearing my son's cry mixing with the sound of wind in the tall weeds. When I woke up, I was back in my bed. It was morning. The sun came through the small window, and for a moment I thought it had all been a terrible nightmare, an imagination of my sick head, until I looked at my still sore body, at the bloodstain on the old sheet, and remembered everything. I got up running, ignoring the pain tearing through my body, ran to the vacant lot stumbling, dug through the trash and weeds with my bare hands, searched every corner, every hole, under every piece of debris. But my son was gone. He wasn't there anymore. For 20 years, my dears, 20 long years that seemed like a lifetime, I carried the guilt and pain of that day like a stone in my chest. Every night, before sleeping, I asked myself the same questions that tortured me. Did he die of cold that first night? Of hunger? Of thirst? Or did some kind soul find him and take care of him? Did he grow up somewhere, wondering who the mother was who abandoned him? These questions hammered in my head day and night, eating me from the inside like a chigger, without giving me a minute of peace. 20 years dragged by like an eternity, my dears. 20 years that seemed to last a lifetime, each day the same as the one before, each dawn bringing the same pain in my chest, the same feeling of emptiness that never passed. I had become a 33-year-old woman, but inside I was still that 12-year-old girl who had lost her son in such a cruel way that sometimes I doubted it had really happened. During all that time, I continued living in the same wooden shack with my father and brother. The house had aged along with us. The boards were more crooked, the tin roof had more holes, and rain came in everywhere when it rained hard. It seemed even the walls kept the sadness of all those years. Gerald had aged very badly. He became even more sour and drunk, always complaining that life had been unfair to him, that the world owed him something that never came. His back became hunched from carrying so much weight in construction, his hair turned completely white, and he developed a dry cough that never stopped, especially in the morning. Even so, he continued drinking like a desperate man and treating me as if I were his employee, never forgetting to remind me that I was a disgrace to the family. Bobby, who was now 37, had turned into a man who was pitiful to see. Never left home to live his own life, never married, never got steady work. He became a fat and lazy man who spent all day drinking and playing cards with other bums at Mr. Wilson's place. When he was home, which was almost always, he'd lie stretched out in an old hammock in the yard or sit on the porch staring at nothing. And when he saw me passing by, he still looked at me with that same look from when I was a girl, a look that made me run inside the house. Sometimes he still tried to corner me in the dark corners of the house, especially when he was more drunk. But I had learned over the years to dodge, to never be alone with him, to always have an excuse to get away. I developed a sixth sense to notice when he had those bad intentions. I was the one who supported that house of misery. I worked from sunup to sundown, washing clothes for others, selling baked goods at the downtown market, doing housework for the richer families who lived in the upper part of Meridian. I woke up every day at 4 a.m, when it was still dark, and you only heard the roosters crow, and went to bed when the moon was already high in the sky, with swollen hands and an aching back. Every penny I earned in the sweat of my brow ended up in the hands of the two drunkards in the house. Money to buy food, money to buy whiskey, money to pay the debts they made in the town's bars. I never saw the color of the money I earned. It went from my hand straight to theirs. And the worst of all is that they always reminded me of the day of abandonment, always threw that in my face when I complained about something or dared to ask for something for myself. "Remember that bastard you brought here?" my father would say every time I asked for money to buy a new dress or shoes that weren't worn through. "If it weren't for us, you'd be on the street with that child. We saved you from a life of disgrace." It was as if they thought they'd done me a favor, as if tearing my son from my arms and forcing me to abandon him in the trash had been an act of kindness and protection. And the most painful part of all is that after so long hearing this day after day, month after month, sometimes I came to believe they were right. Sometimes I convinced myself that I really had no conditions to raise a child, that it had been better that way. But deep in my heart, in a part I kept locked with 7 keys, lived a pain that never passed. Every night, before sleeping, I thought about my boy. I imagined what he'd be like if he'd survived. Would he have dark eyes like mine? Would he be tall like Bobby? Would he be learning to read and write in a school in some distant city? But everything changed on an afternoon in March 1984, on a date that was engraved in my memory as if it were yesterday, March 15th, 1984. I was coming back from Mrs. Evelyn's house, a rich lady who lived in a big 2-story house downtown where I'd spent the whole day washing and ironing clothes. It was heavy work, 5 baskets full of dirty laundry, including large sheets and bath towels that weighed like lead when wet. When I was arriving on our street, still sweaty and tired from the day's work, I saw a different commotion. There was a small group of people standing in front of Mr. Wilson's bar, and in the middle of them was a car I'd never seen around there. It was a black car, big, shining like a mirror, the kind you only saw in big cities or on television. It seemed completely out of place on our dirt road. Next to the car was a man who also seemed not to belong to that place. He was tall, must have been about 40, dressed in a well-cut dark suit and leather shoes that shined even with the dust from the street. He had dark hair combed back and an upright, confident posture. He was talking with Mr. Wilson and some other neighborhood men, but you could see he was the one commanding the conversation. Even from afar, you could tell he wasn't from our town or any small town. He had a different way of moving, a bearing that caught attention, an air of someone used to commanding and being obeyed. It was as if he'd come from another world and appeared there in our forgotten corner of Mississippi. When I passed by the small crowd, trying to get home without drawing attention, the man interrupted the conversation and looked directly in my direction. For a second that seemed like an eternity, our eyes met, and I felt a shiver that went from the soles of my feet to the roots of my hair. There was something in that look that made me tremble and left my legs weak. It wasn't a common look, from someone just observing who passes by. It was as if he was studying me, evaluating me, as if he already knew who I was before even seeing me. They were dark, deep, penetrating eyes that seemed to see through a person and read the most guarded secrets of the heart. But what caught my attention most, what made my blood freeze in my veins, was a small scar he had right in the middle of his forehead. It was a fine mark, but quite visible, as if it had been made by a sharp piece of glass or metal. And when I saw that mark, something inside me stirred, as if a dormant memory was trying to wake up. I ran home with my heart racing, not really understanding what I was feeling. When I arrived, my father and brother were more agitated than normal. They'd drunk more than usual and were talking loud, gesticulating a lot, pacing back and forth in the small house. "Did you see that man in the suit who was at the bar?" Bobby asked as soon as he saw me come in. His voice was altered, kind of nervous. Mr. Wilson said he was asking strange questions about our family. What kind of questions? I wanted to know, feeling a chill in my stomach that had nothing to do with the wind coming through the cracks in the house. Questions about you. About that time, my father answered, but avoided looking in my eyes. For the first time in a long time, he seemed genuinely worried. He asked if we'd had any children here in the house about 20 years ago. If we knew of any woman in the area who had given birth around that time and done something with the child. My world stopped completely at that moment. I felt like the floor had disappeared under my feet, like the roof was going to collapse on my head. My legs went weak, and I had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. What did you answer? We lied, of course, Gerald said, but for the first time in 20 years, I saw real fear in his eyes. The same man who always talked tough and threatened me was afraid of a stranger in a suit. Said there was never any child here, that you never had a son, that you'd always been single. And did he believe it? I don't know, Bobby replied, running his hand through his sweaty hair. He didn't say much, just thanked us for the information and left. But he left money for Mr. Wilson. A lot of money. During that whole night, while the two snored drunk in their corners of the house, I couldn't close my eyes for a minute. I kept tossing and turning in my straw bed, thinking about that man, those eyes that seemed to know me, that strange scar on his forehead. Could it be possible? Could it be that after so long, so many years of pain and guilt, my son had survived that terrible night? Could it be that some kind-hearted person had found him in that vacant lot and decided to raise him as their child? Could it be he'd grown up, become a successful man, and was now looking for me? Or was it something completely different? Was it some police officer investigating an old crime? Had someone told the story and now there'd be trouble for us? The hours dragged by, and I alternated between hope and despair, between dreaming of a reunion and having nightmares about prison. The next morning, very early, even before the sun fully appeared, I left the house and went straight to Mr. Wilson's bar. I found him sweeping the front of the establishment, as he always did every morning. "Mr. Wilson," I said, trying to control the anxiety that made my voice tremble. "That man yesterday. Can you tell me who he was? What did he really want?" He stopped sweeping and looked at me with a serious, worried expression. "Agnes, my child, this matter isn't for you to get involved in. That man, he didn't seem like someone to mess with. He had a look in his eyes that even scared me. But what did he want? Please tell me. I need to know." Mr. Wilson looked around, making sure no one was listening, and lowered his voice. He said he was looking for information about a child who was abandoned in this area about 20 years ago. Said he had very personal reasons to find that child or to know what happened to him. My heart raced like a broken engine. "And did he pay well for the information?" "Very well, Agnes. He left more money than I make in a whole month." He hesitated a bit before continuing. "And he said he'd be back, that he wouldn't give up until he discovered the truth." Did you tell him anything?" "I didn't, my child. I really didn't know anything about an abandoned child." He looked at me kindly. "But there are people in town who remember that time, Agnes. There are people who saw you pregnant even though you tried to hide it. There are people who heard comments, who suspect things." I went back home with my head spinning like a top. Could it be my son looking for the mother who abandoned him? Could it be he wanted to meet me, or did he want revenge? Could it be he hated me for leaving him in the trash? Or did he understand I had no choice? That night was the longest of my life. I stayed awake until dawn, thinking about all the possibilities, all the scenarios that could happen. And for the first time in 20 years, I felt something I'd forgotten existed. Hope. But along with hope came terrible fear. Fear that if it really was my son, he'd despise me. Fear of having to explain why I abandoned him. Fear that he wouldn't understand I had no choice, that I was forced by the two monsters who shared the house with me. It was on that night of total insomnia that I made a decision that changed the course of my life forever. If my son was looking for me, if there was a chance, even a small one, of recovering what I'd lost, I wasn't going to let it pass. No matter what Gerald and Bobby did to me afterwards, no matter the consequences. For the first time in 20 years, I felt there might be a way out of that life of misery and guilt. Maybe there was a possibility of redemption, a chance to finally be free of the two men who had destroyed my life and stolen my youth. That early morning, looking through the small window of the shack at the stars shining up high, I made a solemn promise to myself. If that man came back, I would find courage in my heart to talk to him. I would tell the whole truth, even if it meant confronting the demons of my past and facing the anger of the two tyrants who controlled my life. And if it wasn't my son, well, at least I would have planted a seed of courage in my heart that had been asleep for too long. The dawn of that day brought a different Agnes. A woman who had finally found a reason to dream, a reason to fight, a reason to believe that life could be different from what it had been until then. 3 days after that conversation with Mr. Wilson, the man came back. It was a hot March afternoon, and I was in the yard hanging clothes on the line when I heard the rumble of the black car stopping in front of our house. My heart raced, and for a moment I was paralyzed, with a wet sheet in my hands. My father and brother were on the porch, as always, drinking and playing dominoes. When they saw the car, they got tense, but tried to hide it. The man got out of the vehicle slowly, adjusted his suit, and walked toward our house with firm and determined steps. "Good afternoon," he said, stopping at the little wooden gate that separated our lot from the street. His voice was deep, polite, but there was something behind it that gave me chills. "May I talk with you for a few minutes?" Gerald stood up, trying to seem friendly. Sure, come in, make yourself at home. Want some whiskey? Some water?" The man entered our small yard and looked around, observing every detail of our poverty, the wooden shack, the patched clothes on the line, the dirt floor. When his eyes met mine, he smiled in a way that made me tremble. "Actually," he said, taking a leather folder from the car, "I came here to do business with you." Bobby, who until then had been quiet, approached curiously. "What kind of business, sir?" The man opened the folder and took out some papers. "I bought your property, the house, the yard, everything." He extended the documents to my father. "Here's the deed. I'm now the legal owner of this property." The silence that followed was deafening. Gerald took the papers with trembling hands and tried to read, but was so nervous the letters seemed to dance in front of his eyes. "What do you mean you bought it?" Bobby shouted. "Nobody here sold anything to you." "I didn't need your authorization," the man replied calmly. "The property had accumulated debts for years. Back taxes, unpaid loans. The city auctioned it off, and I bought it. All legal, all documented." It was true. During all those years, my father and brother had accumulated debts they could never pay. Loans from loan sharks, back taxes, money owed everywhere. They always pushed the problems aside, thinking nothing would happen. "But why would you do this?" Gerald asked, his voice coming out choked. "Who are you? What do you want with us?" It was then that the man turned to me. He walked in my direction with slow steps, and I stood there, paralyzed, still holding the sheet against my chest. When he got very close, he took off the sunglasses he was wearing. The eyes that looked at me were identical to mine. Dark, deep, with the same almond shape. And in that moment, seeing those eyes, I knew. My heart knew before my head understood. "My name is Robert," he said, his voice now softer, more affectionate. "Robert Parker. At 20, I discovered I was found in a vacant lot as a newborn by a garbage collector named Mr. Jackson. He raised me as his son, gave me love, taught me to work. I let the sheet fall to the ground. My legs went weak, and if he hadn't held my arm, I would have collapsed right there. Mr. Jackson died 5 years ago," Robert continued, not taking his eyes off mine. "Before he died, he told me where he found me, described the scar I had on my forehead, from a piece of glass in the dump. He said he always believed I had a family somewhere." Gerald and Bobby listened to this with their faces growing paler and paler. The penny was dropping slowly in their heads, and terror was taking hold of them. I spent the last years investigating, looking for clues, hiring people to help me discover my origins. Robert turned to the two men. And I discovered a very interesting story about a 12-year-old girl who had a baby in 1964 and was forced to abandon the child in a lot full of trash. That has nothing to do with us, Bobby tried to lie, but his voice came out nasal from so much fear. Robert gave a dry laugh. Doesn't it? Then I'll tell you what I discovered. He opened the folder again and took out more papers. Mrs. Olson, the midwife who lived near here at the time, remembered very well a pregnant girl who lived in this house. Mr. Thompson, who had an apple tree in his yard, saw you three leaving early in the morning toward the vacant lot. Mrs. Crawford at the pharmacy sold cloth and medicines to a girl who had just given birth. With each name mentioned, each piece of evidence presented, my father and brother got smaller, shrank like cornered rats. And there's more, Robert continued relentlessly. I know exactly who the father is of this child who was abandoned. He looked directly at Bobby. The same man who abused a 12-year-old girl for months. Bobby tried to run, but Robert made a signal, and two large men got out of the car. In a matter of seconds, my brother was immobilized. I didn't come here to kill you, Robert said, his voice cold as ice. That would be too easy. I came to do justice my way. He addressed my father again. You have two options. Grab what you can carry and leave my property now, or I call the police and tell the whole story. Child abuse, abandonment of a helpless person, mistreatment. You know very well you won't last a week in jail. Gerald started crying. A man over 60 years old, crying like a child. Please, sir, don't do this. We have nowhere to go. You should have thought of that 20 years ago, Robert replied without mercy. You have 1 hour to gather your things and disappear from my sight. It was then he turned to me, and all the hardness in his face melted. You're coming with me, Mother. Your life of suffering ends today. I couldn't speak, couldn't process everything that was happening. 20 years dreaming of this moment, 20 years imagining what it would be like to reunite with my son, but I never imagined it would be like this, that he'd come back as a powerful man to save us. How did you achieve all this? I asked, my voice coming out in whispers. Mr. Jackson taught me that intelligence is worth more than strength, he explained, taking my hand gently. He put me in school, encouraged me to study. I got a scholarship, graduated in engineering, started a construction company in Jackson. Today, I have over 200 employees. He pointed to the two men who still seemed not to believe what was happening. For years, they lived off your work, your sweat, your sacrifice. Today that ends. In less than an hour, Gerald and Bobby had gathered their few belongings in an old suitcase and left the property. I saw the two of them walking away on foot down the dirt road, carrying their luggage, with no certain destination. For the first time in their lives, they were the ones who were lost, without a home, without protection. I don't feel sorry, Robert said, seeing my expression. They had 20 years to change, to apologize, to treat you with dignity. They chose to continue being the monsters they always were. That same afternoon, he took me to Jackson, Mississippi. During the trip, he told his story, how Mr. Jackson found him crying among the debris, how he raised him with love and care, how he studied and succeeded in life. He also told me he always knew that one day he'd come back to settle accounts with whoever abandoned him. I didn't know you'd been forced, he told me, holding my hand while driving. I thought you'd abandoned me because you didn't want me. Only today, seeing the way they treated you, I understood you were also a victim. When we arrived at his house in Jackson, a big, beautiful house with a garden and pool, I cried all the tears I'd kept for 20 years. I cried with relief, with happiness, with gratitude for having my boy back. You'll never go through hardship again, he promised me. No one will ever humiliate you again. From today on, you're my mother, and I'll take care of you the way you deserve. That's how, my dears, after 20 years of suffering, life gave me back what it had taken from me so cruelly. My son had returned, not as the helpless baby I lost, but as a strong, successful man, capable of protecting the mother who had suffered so much. And for the first time in 2 decades, I could sleep in peace, knowing I was safe, that I was loved, and that I'd never be alone in the world again. Today, my dears, at my 74 years, I'm here sitting on the porch of my little house in Meridian, looking at my garden that I love so much, and I can say that life gave me a second chance I never thought I deserved. After Robert took me to Jackson in 1984, I spent 14 years living with him in a beautiful, big house with everything a person could dream of. He treated me like a queen, my dears. I never had to work hard again. No one ever humiliated me again. I never went through hardship again. He made a point of giving me everything good and best. In 1987, Robert married a wonderful girl named Claudia, daughter of a farmer from Hattiesburg, an educated, caring girl who welcomed me as a mother from day one. With her, my son had 3 beautiful children: Robert Jr., who's 35 today and is a doctor in Atlanta; Marina, 32, who's a lawyer and lives here in Jackson; and the youngest Daniel, 28, who followed his father's path in engineering. But you know what happened? In 1998, when I was 47, I started feeling a terrible longing for my birthplace. Jackson was beautiful, was modern, had everything. But my heart called for Meridian, called for the simplicity of that small town where I was born and grew up. Robert was worried at first. "Mom, don't you want to live with us anymore? Did we do something wrong?" But it wasn't that. It was just the call of the land, you know? That desire to return to the place where we came into the world. That's when he had the most beautiful idea. He bought me a simple and cozy little house here in the East Side neighborhood, 2 blocks from Meridian's Central Square. A small house, 3 rooms, with a big backyard where I could make my dream garden. It's so you can have your independence, but always knowing you have a family that loves you, he said the day he gave me the key. And here I've been for 27 years, living the best phase of my life. I wake up every day at 5 in the morning, make my strong coffee, and go take care of my plants. I have a bit of everything: tomatoes, lettuce, kale, bell peppers, okra, sweet potatoes. And the herbs: mint, basil, rosemary, lemon balm. When someone in the neighborhood has a cold, they come here to get some tea. My routine is simple and gives me peace. In the morning, I take care of the garden and house. In the afternoon, I sit here on the porch with my crochet and make little tablecloths and rugs to give as gifts to my grandchildren and neighbors. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, my friends come here so we can chat and have coffee. Mrs. Zelda, who's 80, Mrs. Constance, 78, and Mrs. Nadine, who's young, only 65. Robert comes to visit me every month, always brings Claudia and sometimes his children. Robert Jr. has already given me 2 beautiful grandchildren, Peter, 8 years old, and Sophia, 5. They're the joy of my life. When they come here, they run around the yard, help me water the plants, want to know the story of each vegetable I plant. Marina hasn't married yet, says she hasn't found the right man, but she's a hard-working girl. She has her law office and takes good care of her life. She always calls me, sends messages on the cell phone Robert gave me. Daniel got married last year to a girl from Biloxi, and they've already told me I'm going to be a great-grandmother next year. You know something that really moves me? Robert never forgot to honor the memory of Mr. Jackson, the man who saved him in that vacant lot. Every year, on the day he found him, he goes to the cemetery in Jackson to put flowers on the old man's grave, and he always tells me, "He's the one who taught me everything, Mom. He taught me to work, to study, to be a good man." When I think about my life, my dears, I see how God writes straight with crooked lines. Those 20 years of suffering, those dark days I thought would never pass, were preparation for this joy I live today. If I hadn't gone through all that, maybe I wouldn't know how to value the peace I have now. My father Gerald died in 1995 in a charity house in Gulfport, alone and forgotten. My brother Bobby died 3 years later, also alone, of liver cirrhosis. When Robert found out, he showed neither joy nor sadness. He just said, "Everyone reaps what they sow, Mom." Today, when I lie in my little bed every night, I thank God for the life I have. I thank Him for having my son back, for the wonderful grandchildren, for the little house that's mine, for the garden that gives me joy, for the friends I have, for the health I still keep. Sometimes I look at the lot where our old house used to be. Today it's Mr. Charles's little market, and I don't feel anger, I don't feel sadness. I feel gratitude. Gratitude because from that place of so much suffering, the miracle of my new life was born. Robert always says, "You're an example that it's never too late to be happy, Mom. You teach us that it's worth never giving up." And I answer him that the one who taught me to never give up was the love I felt for him the minute he was born, a love that 20 years of separation couldn't erase. Now, when the neighborhood children come here to the yard to pick fruit from my apple tree, I think, life goes in circles, my dears. Sometimes it hurts a lot, but it also knows how to heal. And when it decides to heal, it makes everything new, everything better than it was before. My dears who followed me to the end, I want you to understand something. I never, in 74 years of life, imagined my son would come back to get me. I never dreamed that baby I left crying in the trash would become a man capable of turning our story upside down. When you're going through the worst moment of your lives, when you think there's no way out, that there's no justice in this world, remember my story. Remember that sometimes life takes time, but always settles accounts. What seems like the end may just be the beginning of something much greater. My father and brother spent 20 years thinking they'd gotten rid of a problem. They laughed, humiliated me, made me believe abandoning my son had been the right thing to do. But look how God writes the story. That problem grew up, studied, succeeded in life, and came back to give them exactly what they deserved. You know what's the greatest lesson I learned? That there's no point trying to destroy a mother's love for her child. No matter how much they forced me to do that, no matter how much they tried to convince me it was for the best, my heart never stopped loving that boy. And that love, my dears, was stronger than all the years of separation. Today, when I see my grandchildren playing in the yard, when Robert calls me every day to ask how I am, when Marina comes here to have coffee with me, I know it was worth resisting. It was worth not giving up, even when everything seemed lost. If you know someone who's suffering any kind of violence, don't stay silent. In any country in the world, there are people and organizations ready to help. Seek local authorities. Look for help in the community. No one needs to carry this weight alone. And for you who are suffering now, who think it'll never pass, who feel you're alone in the world, resist. Life has those turnarounds we don't even imagine. Sometimes our salvation is growing in silence, preparing to arrive at the right moment. I was a 12-year-old girl forced to abandon my baby. Today, I'm a 74-year-old grandma surrounded by love, living in my own house, taking care of my garden, with a son who treats me like a queen. If this isn't a miracle, I don't know what is. And now, my dears who made it to the end of this story, I need you. If this story touched your hearts, click that subscribe button down there and turn on the notification bell. Share with people who need to hear that life can take incredible turns. Each subscription, each comment, each share motivates me to continue telling these stories of overcoming. And to show you watched until the end, leave in the comments just one word: miracle. Only those who heard my complete story will understand why this word represents everything I lived through. Do it now. Don't wait another minute. I want to see that comment section full of this beautiful word that changed my life. May God bless each of you, and remember, it's never too late for life to surprise us. My father-in-law locked me in his office during my engagement party and stuffed a check down my dress. "You're going to be mine, not my son's. This money is just the beginning," he said, laughing. What I did with that piece of paper destroyed his life forever. Oh, my dear ones, my loves, how wonderful it is to have you here with me today. Come on in, come closer, because this grandma's heart is warm just knowing you came to keep me company. Look, I know the world is busy, everyone's always in a hurry, but you took time out of your day to sit here and listen to this old lady's story. That's priceless, you know? Let me introduce myself properly. My name is Lucy Helen Ferris, but you can just call me Grandma Lucy. That's how folks around the neighborhood know me. I'm 78 years old. I celebrated my birthday last month, November 15th. I was born in Asheville, a tiny little town in North Carolina, close to the Tennessee border, you know? But today, I live here in Hendersonville, and I've been here for over 50 years now. This town is my home, my everything. And you know what this grandma does every single day, honey? I wake up at 4:30 in the morning, that's right, 4:30, to make bread. Homemade bread, warm, fragrant, the kind where you break it open and that delicious steam comes out. I make white bread, sweet bread, biscuits. Oh, the biscuits, don't even get me started. People around here know. At 7 a.m., Grandma Lucy's house has that smell of fresh bread coming from the oven, and the gate is open for anyone who wants to buy. Look, I started this bread-making business by accident, you know? About 15 years ago, I had just retired from sewing. I did alterations for years, and I felt kind of lost, not knowing what to do with so much free time. My Richard, my husband, he had also stopped working, and there we were, just the two of us, staring at each other. Then one day I made some bread just for us, but so many came out that I said, "Richard, I'm going to take some to Mrs. Carmen, the neighbor." Carmen tried it, thought it was delicious, and the next day she showed up with $5 in her hand, wanting to buy more. That's when the light bulb went on in my head, you know? I started slowly. Made about 20 loaves, sold to folks nearby. Then it grew and grew, and today I make about 80 loaves a day. It's not to get rich, honey, we earn very little, but it's enough to buy treats for the grandkids, pay the electric bill, those little things. And best of all, it keeps me busy, makes me feel useful still. Because you see, sitting at home watching TV all day isn't for me. I need something to do, or I'll go crazy. My kitchen here is tiny, but it's organized my way. I have my bowls all lined up on the shelf, the yeast packets always in the same place, the flour in that cupboard in the corner. Richard always says I could make bread with my eyes closed. I know every corner of this kitchen so well. And it's true. Sometimes I wake up still half asleep, but when I start kneading that dough, feeling it getting soft in my hands, I wake right up. And you, my dear friends watching me now, tell me in the comments, from which corner of America are you watching me? And what time of day did you come across this video? Was it in the morning, having your coffee and eating bread like mine? Was it at lunchtime, taking a break? Or is it already late afternoon, when the sun is setting and you're taking time to relax? I read all the comments, honey, all of them. And I'm so happy to know where you live and what times you take to listen to this. Grandma's stories. Let's create a chain of love? Tell me. Oh, and if you like what you're going to hear today, and I know you will, help me by hitting that like button down there. And subscribe to Grandparents' Tales too. There are more stories coming. Hit the bell so you don't miss anything. I promise that every story I tell here is true, from my own life. I don't make anything up, honey. Now let me make some fresh coffee here and sit properly in this chair, because the story I'm going to tell today, oh my Lord, it's a story I've carried inside my chest for many years. It's about a man who tried to buy me, humiliate me, turn me into something I never was. But it's also about how I turned the tables and showed him, and the whole world, that a poor woman is not a woman for sale. Prepare your heart, because today Grandma here is going to open the memory chest and tell everything, every detail, from the beginning. Look, honey, to understand exactly how everything happened, I need to go back to the beginning, back to Asheville, the little town where I was born. Asheville is there in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, close to the Tennessee border, you know? It's a small town, but back then it was even smaller. Everyone knew everyone, and everyone knew everyone else's business too, for better and for worse. I was born in 1947, right after the war, at a time when America was still rebuilding from so much hardship. My father's name was Oscar Ferris, Mr. Oscar, as folks called him. He was a tall man, thin as a rail, with hands full of calluses from so much work. He was a porter at the Asheville train station. You know what that is, honey? He stayed at the station, waiting for trains to arrive, and helped load and unload suitcases, bags of mail, boxes of merchandise. He was paid per load carried, didn't have a fixed salary. Sometimes he'd come home with decent money. Other times he'd return with almost nothing, depending on how many trains stopped at the station that day. My mother, Evelyn May Ferris, was a washerwoman. She washed clothes for others, for folks who had more means. She'd wake up before sunrise, go get water from the creek, because we didn't have running water at home, and spend the whole day scrubbing clothes on those wooden washboards with that lye soap she made herself. Her hands were red, cracked, but she never complained. Never. She'd sing while washing, you know? She sang those old hymns, church songs, and the sound of her voice echoed through the yard. We lived in a little shotgun house in the colored section of town, a very humble neighborhood. The house had only 3 rooms, 1 bedroom where everyone slept together, me, my 3 siblings, my father, and my mother, a small living room that served multiple purposes, and the kitchen with a wood-burning stove. The floor was dirt, just packed earth. We didn't have an indoor bathroom. It was an outhouse in the back of the yard, very simple. To bathe, Mama would heat water in a big tin on the stove, and we'd wash in an aluminum tub. In winter, oh Lord, that cold water. But we didn't complain, because that's how it was for everyone in the neighborhood. I was the second child. The oldest was Gerald, who was 2 years older than me. Then came me, Lucy. Then came Hortense, 3 years younger, and the baby was Arliss, who was born when I was already 8 years old. 4 mouths to feed, honey. And back then there was no government assistance, no welfare, nothing. Either you worked and ate, or you didn't eat. It was that simple. From a very young age, I helped Mama. At 5, 6 years old, I was already taking care of my younger siblings while she went to wash clothes at the creek. I stayed there, feeding Hortense, changing Arliss's cloth diapers when he soiled them. Because back then there were no disposable diapers, it was flour sackcloth that we washed and used again. When I turned 7, I started going to school in the morning, a little public school nearby, with those desks all scratched and broken. But in the afternoon I had to work too. I went with Mama to pick up laundry from the white ladies' houses, helped carry the heavy bundles, and then helped her hang everything on the line. The food at home was always the same: rice, beans, and when we were lucky, a fried egg or a piece of fatback. Meat we ate only on Sunday, if Daddy had managed to earn extra during the week. But look, we didn't starve, you see? It was simple food, but we had it every day. Mama always found a way. She planted collard greens in the yard, some squash, sweet potatoes. We ate a lot of grits, that thick cornmeal grits with collards. And it was good. It was good because we ate together, sitting at that old wooden table, everyone talking, laughing. Our games were in the street, honey. We didn't have store-bought toys. The doll I had, my Mama made from fabric scraps and buttons for eyes. But we played so many things. We played tag, hide and seek, hopscotch that we drew on the ground with pieces of brick. The boys played marbles, flew kites made of newspaper and paste. We'd run down to the creek to swim, to catch tiny fish with our hands. The water was clean back then, not as polluted as today. I had a friend, Teresa, who lived next door. We were inseparable. We'd make up games, oh Lord, made pretend food with leaves and dirt, played house under the big oak tree in her yard. We talked about what it would be like when we grew up, what pretty dresses we'd wear, what big house we'd have. Poor children's dreams, you know? We dreamed big, even with nothing. But life was hard, you see, honey. Really hard. I remember seeing my daddy come home tired, his back aching from carrying so much weight. I remember my mama crying in secret when there was no money to buy medicine for Arliss, who had a fever. I remember having to miss school to help at home when Mama got sick. I remember feeling ashamed of my patched uniform, my worn-out shoes. The rich girls at school, those daughters of the mill owners, looked at us with disgust, you know? They had pretty lunch boxes, new notebooks, colored pencils. We brought a piece of cornbread with lard wrapped in newspaper and shared a pencil with a classmate. That's how I grew up, honey. I grew up watching my daddy break his back and my mama destroy her hands to put food on the table. I grew up understanding from an early age that poor folks have to work twice as hard to get half of what rich folks have. But I also grew up with love, you see? With lots of love. Because even with all the hardship, all the poverty, my daddy and mama never let us lack affection. We slept all cramped in that tiny room, but we slept hugging, warm, safe. When I turned 12, in 1959, things got even tighter at home. Gerald, my older brother, had gotten a job as a delivery boy at a bakery, but earned peanuts. My daddy had back problems from carrying so much weight and could do fewer and fewer odd jobs. That's when I started working for real, not just helping Mama. A white lady downtown, Mrs. Dalworth, called me to work in her house as a maid. I went Monday through Saturday from 7 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon. I cleaned the house, washed dishes, ironed clothes. I earned almost nothing too, but it was money that helped a lot at home. And that's how my childhood faded away, honey. Poor girls don't have much childhood, don't have that luxury of playing, of studying late. We have to grow up fast, become adults before our time. But I hold no resentment, you see. I'm grateful because that hard life taught me to be strong, taught me the value of things, taught me that we don't need much to be happy. We need dignity, respect, love, and that, thank God, never lacked in our home. The years passed, honey, and I grew up in that heavy routine of working and helping at home. From 12 to 19, I worked at Mrs. Dalworth's house, cleaning, cooking, washing clothes. It was honest work, but exhausting. I'd wake up at 5 in the morning, walk half an hour to her house, and only come back when the sun was already setting. The money I earned I gave all to my mama, who used it to buy food, medicine for my daddy, who had more and more back problems. When I turned 19 in 1966, something happened that changed my life. My brother Gerald had gotten a job at a textile mill in Charlotte. He went there in January, and in March he sent a letter saying there was more work there, that the city was bigger, that I could find something better. My mama didn't want to let me go, but my daddy said, "Evelyn, the girl needs a chance better than ours. Let her try." That's how, in April 1966, with a cardboard suitcase in my hand and a tight heart, I got on that Greyhound bus in Asheville heading to Charlotte. I had never left my little town, honey. Never. I cried so much on that trip, looking out the window, watching my hometown fade behind. But at the same time, there was hope in my chest, you know? A desire to make it, to achieve something in life. I arrived in Charlotte on a cold spring afternoon. Gerald picked me up at the bus station and took me to a boarding house downtown near Independence Square. It was a tiny little room that I shared with 2 other girls who also worked as maids. The landlady, Mrs. Quincy, was a plump, kind lady who charged cheap, $20 a month with breakfast included. Right in the first week, Gerald got me work. In the morning, from 7 to noon, I worked at a family's house, cleaning and tidying. In the afternoon, from 2 to 7, I worked at a diner on Tryon Street, washing dishes and helping in the kitchen. 2 jobs, honey. I worked like crazy, but at least the money was better than in Asheville. I could send some money to my daddy and mama every month and still had a little left to buy a nice soap, a comb, those girly things. And it was at that diner that I met Richard. Look, I'm going to tell you exactly how it was, because to this day I remember every detail of that day. It was a Tuesday, End of May 1967. I was still 19, turning 20 in November. It was a cold day, one of those days with fine drizzle that wets you slowly. The diner was empty, just a customer here and there. I was in the back, in the kitchen, washing a pile of dishes, when I heard the front door open and the bell go ding-ding. I peeked through the window that looked into the customer area and saw a tall young man with neatly combed hair walk in, carrying a leather briefcase under his arm. He wore a suit and tie, something we didn't see much in that humble diner. He sat at the counter and ordered coffee from Mr. Waldman, the owner. "Miss," he called me, and I almost dropped a dish in shock. "Could you bring me a glass of water, please?" I dried my hands on my apron and brought the water. When I placed the glass in front of him, our eyes met. Oh my Lord, what blue eyes that young man had, blue like the Carolina sky after rain. He smiled at me, a shy kind of smile, and said, "Thank you, miss. What's your name?" "Lucy, sir," I answered, lowering my eyes because I got really embarrassed. "Lucy," he repeated, as if storing my name in his memory. "What a beautiful name. I'm Richard Albert Alden." That's where it started, honey. Richard started coming to the diner every day. He worked at a law office nearby. He was finishing law school. And every day, mid-afternoon, he'd show up for coffee. And every day he'd strike up a conversation with me. He'd ask where I was from, how long I'd been in Charlotte, if I liked the city. I'd answer kind of shyly, afraid Mr. Waldman would yell at me for chatting during work hours, but Richard was so kind, so polite, that even Mr. Waldman found it amusing. After about 2 months like this, on a Saturday in July, Richard waited for me at the diner door when I got off work. He was nervous, running his hand through his hair, and when he saw me, he came running. "Lucy, I know this might seem forward of me, but would you accept going to get ice cream with me on Sunday?" I turned red as a beet. No boy had ever asked me out, honey. Never. I didn't even know what to answer, but I ended up saying yes, with my voice all shaky. And that's how we started dating. Richard was a wonderful young man, you see. Caring, respectful, a gentleman. He treated me like I was a princess, even though I was a domestic worker and he was the son of wealthy people. Because yes, his family had money. His father, Dr. Albert Augustus Alden, was a doctor, one of the most respected doctors in Charlotte. He had a large clinic downtown, treated important people from Atlanta who came here for business. Richard's mother, Mrs. Eulalie, was a retired teacher, an elegant lady who always dressed nicely. When Richard told me about his family, I got scared, you know. I thought, my Lord, this boy is from another class. What does he want with me? But he always said, "Lucy, I don't care about that. I like you just the way you are. You're hardworking, honest, have a good heart. That's what matters." We dated in secret for almost 6 months. Richard was afraid to tell his parents. He said his father was very demanding, very strict, would make a scene. But in January 1968, he gathered courage and took me to meet the family. Oh my Lord, that day I'll never forget. I was nervous as could be. I had bought a navy blue dress with the money I saved for months. It was the nicest dress I had, and put my hair in a neat bun. Richard picked me up at the boarding house in his car, a beige Volkswagen Beetle, and took me to the family home, which was in a wealthy neighborhood near Freedom Park. The house was beautiful, honey. So beautiful. It was a large house, 2 stories, with a front garden full of roses and hydrangeas. It had a porch with white columns, huge windows with lace curtains. I looked at all that, and my heart almost jumped out. My God, I don't belong in this place, I thought. Richard rang the doorbell, and a maid opened the door, a girl in a black uniform and white apron. She took us to the living room, where Dr. Albert and Mrs. Eulalie were sitting on the sofa, waiting. "Good afternoon," I said, doing a small curtsy, trying to be polite. Mrs. Eulalie gave a forced smile and replied, "Good afternoon, dear." But Dr. Albert didn't even smile. He looked me up and down with those cold gray eyes, as if he were evaluating merchandise. He was a large, strong man, with a graying mustache and hair slicked back with pomade. He wore a gray suit even though he was at home and had a thick gold chain on his wrist. "So you're this Lucy," he said, his voice deep as thunder. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. And it didn't sound like a greeting, it sounded like an accusation. "Yes, sir," I replied, my voice almost disappearing. "Where are you from?" "Asheville, sir." "And what do your parents do?" I swallowed hard. "My father was a porter at the train station, but today he doesn't work anymore due to health problems. My mother was a washerwoman." The silence that followed was heavy as lead. Mrs. Eulalie cleared her throat, embarrassed. "Doctor..." Albert raised an eyebrow and looked at Richard with an expression that said everything. "You brought this girl here?" "Father, mother," Richard said, his voice firm, but I could tell he was nervous. "Lucy and I have been dating for 6 months. She's a wonderful girl, hard-working, honest. I really like her and wanted you to meet her." Dr. Albert got up from the sofa. He was even taller and more intimidating standing. He approached me, so close I could smell his expensive cologne. He looked me in the eyes and said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "Richard has always been very sensitive, very idealistic. But one thing is being idealistic. Another is being foolish. Anyway, welcome, Lucy. Let's see what time has in store for us." The visit was horrible, honey. Horrible. Mrs. Eulalie tried to be polite, served tea, asked questions about Charlotte, but everything seemed fake. Doctor. Albert barely spoke to me, and when he did, it was always with that tone of superiority, as if I were inferior. When it was time to leave, at the door, he put his hand on Richard's shoulder and said loud enough for me to hear, "My son, you're still young. You have a lot to learn about life, about appropriate choices." I left that house wanting to cry. In the car, Richard apologized 1,000 times, said his father was always like that with everyone, that I shouldn't mind. But how could I not mind, honey? I had been humiliated, despised, treated as if I had no value at all. But the worst was yet to come. Despite that difficult first visit, Richard didn't give up on me. He stayed firm, saying his love was bigger than any prejudice. And I, silly girl in love that I was, believed that love would be enough. Oh, honey, how naive we are when we're young. We continued dating throughout 1968. Richard graduated from law school in December that year, and right after, in January 1969, he proposed to me. It was on a Sunday afternoon at Independence Square. He knelt in front of everyone, opened a little box with a ring. It wasn't gold, it was a simple silver band, because Richard didn't have much money yet, and asked, "Lucy Helen Ferris, will you marry me?" I said yes, with tears streaming down my face. I loved that man, honey. I really loved him, with all the strength of my 21-year-old heart. When we told his parents, the reaction was cold. Dr. Albert was silent for what seemed like an eternity. Then he said, with that deep voice, "If that's what you want, my son, then so be it. But I'm going to insist on throwing an engagement party worthy of the Alden family name. I don't want people saying my son is getting married in secret, as if he were ashamed." At the time, I thought that was a gesture of acceptance, you know? I thought he was trying to make peace, include me in the family. Richard was happy too, said it was a sign that his father was accepting our relationship. How wrong we were, my God. How blind we were. The party was set for Saturday, March 15th, 1969. Dr. Albert insisted it be at the family mansion, that he would take care of everything himself, decorations, food, drinks, invitations. "Don't you worry about anything," he'd say, with that smile I couldn't tell if it was sincere or fake. Richard was thrilled. I was nervous. The week before the party, I could barely sleep. I'd toss and turn in the boarding house bed, wondering if everything would be okay, if people would accept me, if I could avoid embarrassing myself among so many important people. Because according to Richard, his father had invited over 100 people, doctors, lawyers, politicians, businessmen from Charlotte, people I'd never seen in my life, people from a completely different world than mine. The day of the party came. I had bought a new dress, spent almost all the money I'd saved, a peach-colored dress with a full skirt down to my knees that the saleswoman at the store said was the latest fashion. I styled my hair in an updo I saw in a magazine, put on light pink lipstick. When I looked in the mirror, I thought, can I look like I belong in this place? Richard picked me up at 7 in the evening. When we arrived at the mansion, I almost fainted. The house was transformed, honey. There were colored lights decorating the entire garden, Japanese lanterns hanging from the trees, a huge white tent set up in the outdoor area where the tables were. There was a long table just for sweets, brownies, petit fours, truffles, pralines, and another table just for appetizers. There was even a waiter in uniform serving champagne in crystal glasses. People started arriving, women in expensive dresses, jewelry sparkling on their necks and ears, hair done at salons, men in dark suits, smelling of imported cologne, talking about business and politics. I felt like a fish out of water, honey. I felt tiny, insignificant, like at any moment someone would point at me and say, "What is this poor girl doing here?" But Richard stayed by my side all night, introducing me to everyone, saying with pride, "This is Lucy, my fiancée." Some looked at me with curiosity, others with a smirk, but most were polite, at least in front of Richard. Around 9:30 at night, when the party was in full swing, with music playing and people laughing and talking loudly because of the drinks, Dr. Albert appeared beside me. He was elegant in a navy blue suit, with a silk handkerchief in his pocket, smelling of that strong, expensive cologne. He put his hand on my shoulder, a heavy hand that made me feel a bad shiver, and said very quietly, almost in my ear, "Lucy, I need you to come with me to my office. I have a special gift for you, a gift that I want to give you in private." The way he said it, honey, it wasn't an invitation, it was an order. And there was something in that tone of voice that scared me, but I couldn't refuse, right? It was my fiancé's father, it was his house, it was the party he had paid for. So I said, "Yes, sir," and followed him. We crossed the room full of people, went through the side hallway, and he took me to his office, a huge room with bookshelves from floor to ceiling, a dark, heavy wooden desk, leather armchairs, thick carpet on the floor. As soon as we entered, he closed the door, and I heard the sound of the key turning in the lock. My heart raced. "Dr. Albert," I said, my voice shaking, "what do you want to give me?" He didn't answer right away. He went to the bar in the corner of the room, poured himself a glass of whiskey, took a sip, and only then turned to me. The way he looked at me, my lord, I'll never forget that look. It was no longer the cold, superior look from before. It was a look that undressed me, that made me feel dirty, vulnerable, afraid. "You know, Lucy," he began, walking slowly toward me, "since the first time you entered this house, I noticed something. You're too beautiful for a failure like my son." I took a step back. "Excuse me?" He laughed, a low, bitter laugh. "Richard is weak, always has been, doesn't have the fiber I have, doesn't have the power, the money, the presence I have." He took another step. I took another back until my back hit the bookshelf. "You deserve something better. You deserve a real man." What happened in those next few minutes, honey, I don't like to remember. I don't even like to put into words. But I need to tell because you need to understand the magnitude of the humiliation, the disgust, the pain I felt. He cornered me there against that bookshelf. The smell of whiskey on his breath mixed with that sickening cologne. The words he said, words no man should say to a decent girl, to his own son's fiancée. He said I wasn't going to be Richard's wife. Said I was going to be something else, something dirty, hidden, shameful. Said the marriage would just be for show, but my body would be his, whenever he wanted. I tried to leave, tried to push him away, but he was big, too strong. He grabbed me by the arm, grabbed so hard it left a purple bruise later, and whispered in my ear, "Either you accept, or I cut off all of Richard's allowance. You'll live in the slums. You'll starve. You want that?" I was trembling, crying, begging him to let me go. And then he released my arm, went to his desk, got a checkbook, and started writing. The pen scratched the paper with that sound that echoed in the heavy silence of the room. When he finished, he tore off the check and walked back to me. "This here," he said, waving the paper in my face, "is an advance. It's enough to buy your parents' house 10 times over. It's your price, Lucy. The price of your body, your obedience, your silence." And then, with a smile that made me feel like the dirtiest creature in the world, he stuffed that check inside the neckline of my dress. The paper brushed against my skin, and I felt like something was burning, something filthy contaminating me. "Think about it fondly," he said, unlocking the door. "And remember, if you tell Richard, I'll deny everything." And who do you think he'll believe? The little maid who came from the mountains, or his father? He opened the door and left, leaving me there alone, leaning against that bookshelf, trembling, with that cursed paper burning inside my dress. I don't know how long I stayed there. Could have been seconds, could have been minutes. I just remember finally being able to walk, leaving that room, and going straight to the bathroom. I locked the door, looked in the mirror, and didn't recognize the girl I saw there. Red eyes, face stained with tears, smudged lipstick. I took that check out of my dress with disgust, like it was a poisonous animal, and stuffed it in the little purse I had brought. I washed my face, tried to compose myself. But inside, honey, inside, I was destroyed. I was broken into 1,000 pieces. When I went back to the party, Richard came running. "Honey, where were you? I was looking for you." I forced a smile. I was in the bathroom. I felt sick. I think I ate something that didn't agree with me. He was worried, wanted to take me home, but I said I was better. Lie, I wasn't better. I would never be the same after that night. The days following that party were the darkest of my life, honey. I went back to the boarding house that night and couldn't sleep. I stayed staring at the ceiling, listening to the other girls snoring, feeling that cursed check burning inside my purse like it was a live coal. I thought, if I tear it up, it's all over. If I return it, he'll get angry. If I accept? No, I couldn't accept. But what did I do then? The hours passed slowly, dragging. When Mrs. Quincy's clock struck 5 in the morning, I was still awake, my eyes burning from being open so long, my body aching from being so tense. I got up like a ghost, got ready mechanically, and went to work. But it wasn't me living that life anymore. It was an empty body, a shell walking through the streets of Charlotte. The following Sunday, Richard showed up at the boarding house all smiles, wanting to know how I thought the party was. I forced a smile and said it had been wonderful. He talked about plans for the wedding, about the small house he was trying to rent for us to live in, about how happy we'd be. And every word of his was a stab in my chest, because I knew there was a terrible secret between us, a secret that could destroy everything. He held my hand. "Lucy, are you okay? Your hand is ice cold." "I'm fine, honey. It's just the cold." Lie. It was fear freezing me from the inside. I wanted to tell. God knows how much I wanted to. Open my mouth and let it all out, the locked office, the disgusting words, the heavy hands, the check stuffed in my dress. But every time I was about to open my mouth, I heard Dr. Albert's voice echoing in my head. "Who do you think he'll believe? The little maid who came from the mountains, or his father?" I spent the whole week like a zombie. I went to work at the house in the morning, but broke 3 plates because my hands were shaking. The lady looked at me angrily. "Lucy, those plates are expensive. If you break another one, I'm taking it out of your pay." I apologized, head down, tears wanting to escape, but I held them back. In the afternoon, at the diner, it was even worse. Mr. Waldman called me out twice because I forgot customer orders, confused change, dropped an entire tray of glasses. "Girl, what's going on with you? You crazy?" At night, at the boarding house, I couldn't even eat. I'd sit at the dining table, look at the plate of food Mrs. Quincy had prepared, rice, beans, a piece of meat, and my stomach would turn. The other girls would talk, laugh, gossip about the day, but I didn't hear anything. It was like I was underwater, everything muffled, distant, unreal. Mrs. Quincy got worried. One night, she sat next to me and put her hand on my shoulder. "Girl, what's happening to you? Are you sick? Heart trouble? Did you fight with your fiancé?" "No, Mrs. Quincy. Just tired." Lie. It was despair. It was a deep, dark pit that was swallowing me slowly, and I couldn't find a rope to pull myself out. I thought about writing a letter to my mama telling her everything. I got paper and pen, sat on the bed, and started. "Mama, I need to tell you something." But I couldn't continue. How was I going to tell my mama, who lived far away, who couldn't do anything, who would just suffer with me? I crumpled the paper and threw it in the trash. On Thursday of that week, I was at the diner when the door opened and Dr. Albert walked in. My blood froze. The noise of the diner, customer conversation, plates clanging, coffee machine hissing, everything disappeared. There was only him, walking toward the counter, that predator's smile on his face. He had never been to that diner before. Never. It was too humble a place for a man like him. But there he was, sitting at the counter, ordering coffee as if it were the most natural thing in the world. When Mr. Waldman went to the kitchen to get something, Dr. Albert leaned toward me. The smell of that expensive cologne invaded my nostrils, made me nauseous. "So, Lucy," he whispered, his voice low, intimate, disgusting. "Have you thought about my proposal, or do you need more incentive?" I couldn't answer. My throat had closed. My heart was beating so hard I thought it would come out of my mouth. He smiled, that cold, cruel smile, and continued. "You know, I can make your lives very difficult. Very difficult indeed. I can make sure no law office in Charlotte hires Richard. I can make sure you can't rent any house in this city. You know I have important friends, don't you? The mayor has dinner at my house every week. The police chief owes me favors. You really think anyone will believe a maid's word against mine?" He drank the coffee in one gulp, placed the coins on the counter forcefully, the metal clinking loudly, and left. It was a threat, clear, direct, frightening, and effective, because it left me paralyzed with fear. When he left, I ran to the diner bathroom and threw up. I threw up everything in my stomach, which was almost nothing because I'd barely eaten in the last few days, and then stayed there, kneeling on the cold floor of that dirty bathroom, crying like a lost child, crying like my mama cried in secret when the money didn't last the month, crying like I had cried when I left Asheville. That night, I thought about running away. I thought about grabbing my things, which weren't many, fit in a small suitcase, and disappearing from Charlotte, going back to Asheville, hugging my mama and never leaving her side. But then I remembered. What about Richard? I loved him, honey. I really loved him. How was I going to abandon him without even explaining why? And if I told the truth and he didn't believe me, I would lose him anyway. But on top of that, I would carry the shame of being called a liar, crazy, a woman who makes up stories for attention. I was trapped like a bird in a cage, with no way out, no air to breathe, beating my wings against the bars until they hurt. On Saturday, March 22nd, exactly 1 week after the party, the last straw happened. I was walking back to the boarding house after work, already at dusk, when a car stopped beside me. It was Richard's beige Beetle. But the one driving wasn't him. It was Dr. Albert. "Get in the car, Lucy. I need to talk to you." My heart raced. The street was almost empty. There was just an old man walking far away and a woman sweeping the sidewalk across the street. I looked around, searching for help, but there was no one nearby. "No, sir. I need to go home." He got out of the car. The door slammed hard. He came walking toward me, slowly, like a cat playing with the mouse before killing it. The street was getting dark, the streetlights starting to turn on one by one. And at that moment, I felt more fear than I had felt in my entire life. He got close. So close I could see the veins bulging in his neck, the barely contained rage in his eyes, the clenched jaw. "You think you can defy me?" he said, his voice low but full of venom, real threat. "You think you're that special? Listen here, you poor girl. You're not the first and you won't be the last. I always get what I want. Always. And nobody, you hear me? Nobody tells me no." And then he did something that terrified me, chilled me to the bone. He opened his hand, showed a manila envelope and said, "Inside here are photos of you. Photos I had a private investigator take. You entering that shabby boarding house, you working at that fifth-rate diner, you in those cheap clothes walking down the street. If you don't accept my proposal, I'm going to spread all over the city that you're a gold digger, an opportunist who just wants the family's money. I'm going to show these photos to everyone. I'm going to make up stories about you, I'm going to destroy your reputation, and then I'm going to destroy Richard too, cutting off everything he has. He'll be penniless. And it will be your fault." I felt my legs weaken. He had investigated me. He had followed me. He had taken pictures of me without me knowing, as if I were a criminal, as if I were something dirty that needed to be documented. I felt violated, exposed, completely powerless. I felt like a cornered animal, with no way out, waiting for the final blow. He got in the car, started the engine, and drove off, accelerating hard, leaving a cloud of dust and that smell of exhaust. I stood there in the middle of the street, trembling, wanting to scream, but unable to make any sound. I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't move. I wanted to cry, but no more tears came out, as if I had dried up inside. When I finally got to the boarding house, I locked the room door with that old key, threw my purse on the floor, and threw myself on the bed. And it was there, on that horrible night, that I reached my lowest point. The pit had a bottom, and I had reached it. I started to consider accepting. I thought, rationalized, convinced myself that maybe it's better this way. Maybe I'll marry Richard, pretend everything is okay, and accept being that disgusting man's toy. At least Richard will have a good life, won't suffer, won't lose everything. I sacrifice myself, but he stays happy. Isn't that what love means? Sacrifice? I was willing to sacrifice myself, honey. To destroy myself inside, to protect the man I loved. But was that really love? Or was it cowardice? Or was it just the desperation of a 21-year-old girl who didn't see another way out? I stayed up all night, in unbearable mental torture. My head spinning, spinning, spinning. Did I have the courage to report him? To whom? The police? Would they believe me against a wealthy, respected doctor, friend of the police chief? Richard? What if he sided with his father? What if he called me crazy, a liar, a woman seeking attention? When the sun rose on Sunday, I was exhausted, empty, broken into 1,000 pieces. I looked in the cracked mirror on the room wall and didn't recognize the girl I saw there. Sunken eyes, with purple circles underneath. Pale face, colorless lips. The expression of someone who had already given up on everything, who had already accepted defeat. But then, in that moment of complete despair, when I was ready to raise the white flag and surrender, something unexpected happened. I remembered something my mama always said back in Asheville, when life got tight, when money ran out, when it seemed like there was no way out. My daughter, there comes a time when you have to choose between bowing down or standing up. And strong women don't bow to any man, no matter how much power he has. Could be a boss, could be a doctor, could be a king. Nobody has the right to make us doormats. My mama, Evelyn May, that woman who washed clothes until her hands were raw to feed her children. That woman who woke up before the sun and slept after the moon. That woman who never complained, never gave up, never bent, even when life pushed her down. What would she think of me if she knew I was about to sell myself, surrender myself, become a man's property? And in that moment, honey, something changed inside me. It wasn't a big change. It wasn't an explosion of courage. It wasn't a magical transformation. It was just a tiny spark, almost going out, but it was a spark of anger, of indignation, of refusal to accept that fate. I grabbed my purse, took that check out of it, that piece of paper that had haunted me for a whole week, and looked at it. And for the first time since the party, I didn't feel fear. I felt anger. Anger at a man who thought he could buy people like buying a pound of meat at the butcher. Anger at a system that protected men like him and crushed women like me. And that's when the idea came. A crazy, dangerous idea that could go terribly wrong. But it was the only weapon I had. If that man had used power and money against me, I was going to use the only thing he couldn't control. The truth exposed in public. Shame, scandal, sunlight entering the dark place where he did his dirty deeds. I didn't know exactly how I was going to do it yet, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to bow down. I wasn't going to accept. I was going to fight, even if it cost everything I had, even if it meant losing Richard, even if it meant becoming the target of that powerful man's anger. Because some things are more important than safety. Some things are more important than comfort, and dignity is one of them. For the first time in a week, I could breathe deeply. The fear was still there, enormous, suffocating, heavy as a stone in my chest. But along with it, now there was something more. There was hope. And there was a plan starting to form in my head. A plan that involved that engagement party, those important guests, that stage where Dr. Albert was going to make his speech as proud father. If he wanted to use me, I was going to use him too. If he wanted to expose me, I was going to expose him first. And this time, it would be in front of everyone. 2 weeks after that confrontation on the street, I received an invitation. It was a beautiful card, printed on thick cream paper with gold lettering. It said, Dr. Albert Augustus Alden and Mrs. Eulalie Alden have the pleasure of inviting you to a reception dinner in honor of the engagement of their son Richard Albert Alden to Miss Lucy Helen Ferris, April 12, 1969, at 8 p.m. at the family residence. Richard showed me the invitation, all excited. Honey, my father wants to throw a more intimate dinner, just with the most important people in Charlotte society. He said the previous party was too big, too chaotic, and he wants something more elegant for you to get to know people better. I looked at that invitation and knew. I knew this was another move by Dr. Albert. He thought I had surrendered, that I had agreed to stay quiet in my corner. He wanted to show me off like a trophy, present me to society as the humble daughter-in-law he had generously accepted. But he didn't know I had other plans. In the days leading up to the dinner, I prepared. I didn't buy a new dress. I had no money and didn't want to spend on that. I used the same peach-colored dress from the other party. But I rehearsed. I rehearsed in the mirror, in the boarding house room, the words I was going to say. I rehearsed until I could speak without trembling, without stuttering, without crying. And I hid that cursed check inside the bodice of my dress, well tucked away, waiting for the right moment. Mrs. Quincy noticed something had changed in me. Girl, you're different. You have a sparkle in your eyes, but it's not the sparkle of happiness. It's a sparkle of... What? Courage, Mrs. Quincy. It's the sparkle of courage. April 12th came. A Saturday. Richard picked me up at 7:30 in the evening. On the way to the mansion, he talked non-stop about how happy he was, how he thought his father was finally accepting our relationship, how it would be a wonderful night. I just listened, my hand cold inside his, my heart beating like a war drum. When we arrived at the mansion, the scene was even more luxurious than before. Inside the house, in the huge living room, they had set up round tables with white tablecloths, candles in silver candelabras, flower arrangements that must have cost more than I earned in a month. There must have been about 50, 60 people, all dressed elegantly, all talking quietly, drinking wine in crystal glasses. And in the corner of the room, they had set up a small stage with a microphone. Dr. Albert came to greet us. He was impeccable in a black tuxedo, his hair shiny with pomade, that fake smile stuck on his face. He greeted Richard with a pat on the shoulder, and when he looked at me, I saw it. I saw in his eyes that certainty of victory, that gleam of someone who thinks they've already won the game. "Lucy, so glad you came," he said, his voice syrupy, disgusting. "You look beautiful. Come, let's introduce you to our dearest friends." And he grabbed me by the arm, forcefully, possessively, and dragged me through the room, introducing me to everyone as the future daughter-in-law. Always with that smile, always with that tone that seemed kind, but to me sounded like a threat. Dinner was served at 8:30. There was an appetizer, main course, dessert. Everything prepared by hired chefs. People ate, drank, talked about politics, business, about the new clinic, Dr. Albert was building. I could barely swallow the food. Each forkful seemed like a piece of stone going down my throat. Around 10 o'clock after dessert, Dr. Albert stood up and tapped his fork on his wine glass. The tinkling of crystal echoed through the room. Conversation ceased. Everyone looked at him. "My dear friends," he began, that deep, imposing voice, "I would like to say a few words on this very special night." He paused dramatically. "As you all know, my son Richard is about to get married, and I, as a father, could not be more proud." The word came out with some effort, as if it hurt his mouth. "Richard chose a simple girl, humble, of modest origin, and I learned that love doesn't choose social class." People applauded politely. I felt my stomach turn. "Therefore," he continued, "I want Richard to come here and make a toast to his future, to our future as a family." Richard stood up, emotional, and went to the stage. He took the microphone and started talking about how grateful he was to his father, how he loved his family, how I was the woman of his life. And it was at that moment, honey, that I stood up. My legs were shaking, but I walked. I walked between the tables, with all those people looking at me with curiosity. I climbed the 2 steps to the stage. Richard saw me and smiled, thinking I was going to compliment his speech. But when he saw my face, the smile disappeared. "Lucy, do you want to say something?" I took the microphone from his hand. My hand was shaking so much I almost dropped it. I took a deep breath. I looked at the room full of people. And then I looked straight into Dr. Albert's cold gray eyes. "Yes," I said, my voice coming out hoarse through the microphone. "I have something very important to say." Dr. Albert tensed. I saw his jaw clench. "I wanted to thank my father-in-law," I began, and my voice became firmer, "for this wonderful dinner. And for another gift he gave me a few weeks ago." Total silence in the room. At the previous engagement party, on March 15th, while all of you were outside toasting and having fun, Dr. Albert called me to his office. He said he had a special gift to give me, a private gift. Richard was looking at me without understanding. Mrs. Eulalie had dropped her fork on her plate. "He locked the office door," I continued, the words now coming out like a waterfall, impossible to stop. "And he told me I was too beautiful for his son. He said I wasn't going to be Richard's wife. He said I was going to be something else." I couldn't speak explicitly, but the tone of my voice made it clear what that something else meant. He cornered me, grabbed me hard. "Look, there's still a purple mark on my arm," and made an indecent proposal. He said the marriage would be for show, but my body would be his. Gasps of shock echoed through the room. An elderly lady put her hand to her chest, horrified. Richard had turned white as a sheet. "And to seal this agreement," I took the check from inside my dress bodice, "he wrote this, a check for an absurd amount. He said it was the price of my body, my obedience, my silence. And he stuffed it inside my dress, laughing, saying that if I didn't accept, he would destroy Richard's life and mine. I showed the check to the photographer's camera that was there documenting the dinner. I showed Richard, who read it, and his eyes filled with tears of rage. I showed Mrs. Eulalie, who turned pale. And then I turned to the entire room. Dr. Albert, here's your change. I'm not for sale. My dignity has no price. And you, who call yourself a good man, respected doctor, family man, are actually a disgusting man who tries to buy and control women. And then, very slowly, very theatrically, I tore that check. Once, twice, 3, 4 times, until it became confetti. And I threw the little pieces in his face, falling like dirty snow on top of the impeccable black tuxedo. What happened next was too fast. Richard let out a scream of pain, betrayal, rage, and jumped off the stage. He went straight to his father. And there, in front of everyone, he punched Dr. Albert in the face. A punch so hard the man fell backward, knocking over a table, glasses and plates shattering on the floor. "How dare you!" Richard was screaming, the veins in his neck bulging. "How dare you touch my fiancé! You're a monster!" Women screamed. Men stood up startled. Mrs. Eulalie started crying, sobbing loudly. "Albert, what have you done? For God's sake, what have you done?" Dr. Albert got up from the floor, his nose bleeding, the check pieces still stuck to his suit. He looked at me with so much hatred, I felt a chill down my spine. But it wasn't fear anymore. It was the certainty that I had won. People started leaving, quickly, whispering to each other, looking with disgust at Dr. Albert. In a matter of minutes, the room was almost empty, and I stayed there, on the stage, trembling, but standing and free. What happened after that night changed everything, honey. Changed it forever. The following Monday, Mrs. Eulalie filed for divorce. She had been humiliated in front of all of Charlotte's society, and she wasn't going to forgive. The divorce was contentious, took months, but in the end, she got half of everything: the house, the clinic, the savings. Dr. Albert tried to fight, but her lawyers were better. The clinic partners met and voted to remove him. They said they couldn't have a scandal like that tarnishing the business's reputation. Within 6 months, Dr. Albert had lost everything: his family, his company, his respect. The last time I heard about him, I learned he was living in a small apartment in the poor part of town, alone, bitter, taking medicine for depression. I don't feel sorry. I feel that justice was served. As for me and Richard, we started from scratch. He refused to accept anything from his father. We rented a humble little house right here in Charlotte, in the Dilworth neighborhood. 2 rooms, bathroom in the back, cramped kitchen. But it was ours, earned with our work. Richard got a job at a small law firm, earning little. I kept working, mornings at the house, afternoons at the diner. We saved every penny. We got married in August 1969, in a simple ceremony at the neighborhood church, just with my parents who came from Asheville, my brother Gerald, and 2 of Richard's friends. No party, no luxury, but with real love. The years passed. We had 3 children. Paul was born in 1971, Marina in 1974, and Rafe in 1978. We raised them with what we had: little money, but lots of affection. Richard worked his whole life as a lawyer, always honest, never accepting bribes or dirty business. I worked until 2010, when I retired from sewing. That's when I started with the bread, as I told you at the beginning, and it was the best thing I did. Today, at 78 years old, I wake up every day at 4:30 in the morning here in my kitchen. I still live in Charlotte, now in a bigger house we managed to buy in 1985, near downtown. Richard is here with me, 80 years old, retired, but still strong, thank God. We have coffee together every morning before I start making the bread. My 3 children live here in Charlotte. Paul is a math teacher, Marina works at the health clinic, and Rafe has a mechanic shop. They come here every week, always bringing the grandkids. There are 7 grandchildren in total, honey. 7, from 3 to 15 years old. The house fills with noise, laughter, running around. And I love every second. Last Sunday we had lunch here at home, that big Southern family lunch, you know? Fried chicken, collard greens, mac and cheese, cornbread, sweet potato casserole. The table full of people, everyone talking together, the grandkids playing in the yard. Richard sitting at the head of the table, smiling, happy. And I looked at all that and thought, it was worth it. Every fight, every difficulty, every tear. It was worth it. Because we built this, honey, brick by brick with our own hands, without dirty money, without favors from powerful people, without selling ourselves to anyone. With dignity. Sometimes I pass by the old Alden family mansion. Today it's a private school. Dr. Albert sold it when he needed money. And you know what I feel when I pass by there? Nothing. No anger, no resentment, no bitterness. That's part of the past. And the past is behind me. What matters is today. It's waking up and having my Richard beside me, snoring softly. It's kneading the bread dough and feeling that soft texture in my hands. It's seeing the grandkids eating warm bread with butter and asking for more. It's receiving my daughter's hug, my son's kiss, my youngest's firm handshake. It's knowing that I didn't sell myself, that I didn't bow down, that I fought and won. Life didn't get easy, no. It continued being the life of poor folks, working people. But it's an honest, clean, dignified life. And that's priceless. Look, honey, if there's someone out there watching me who's going through something similar, if there's someone being pressured, being threatened, being treated like an object that can be bought and sold, I want you to hear carefully what this grandma is going to say. You're not alone, and you don't have to accept it. I know it's scary to face powerful people. I know it seems impossible to fight against those who have money, influence, respect in society. I know you keep thinking, who will believe me? But listen, the truth always has a power that lies can't overcome. Always. When I was in that locked office, trembling with fear, I thought there was no way out. When he stuffed that check in my dress, I felt like the dirtiest creature in the world. I almost accepted. Almost sold myself because it seemed like the only way. But then I remembered who I was, daughter of Evelyn, who never bent, who washed clothes until her hands bled, but never lost her dignity. And that's what saved me. Remembering that my worth isn't in what others think of me. It's in what I know about myself. Nobody can buy me if I don't put myself up for sale. You who are out there, no matter where you are in the world, in America, in Europe, in Asia, anywhere, know that there are people and organizations ready to help. Seek out the authorities in your country. Talk to people you trust. Expose the abuse. Don't carry this alone. Silence protects the abuser, never the victim. And for you who've never been through this, but who know someone who might be going through it, open your eyes. Pay attention to the signs. That coworker who's too quiet, that neighbor who doesn't look anyone in the eye anymore, that family member who suddenly changed. Reach out. Sometimes they just need to know someone believes them. I tore that check and threw it in his face because I chose my dignity. And you can choose too. Always can. No matter how many threats they make, how much fear they try to put in you, the choice to stand up or bow down is yours. Always has been. Always will be. Today, I make bread. It's a simple life. But it's my life, earned with my hands, with my sweat, with my courage, and that's worth more than all the checks in the world. My dear ones, if this story touched your heart, if you made it here with me on this journey, I need to ask you something urgent. Subscribe to Grandparents' Tales now and hit that bell. Why? Because each subscriber is a voice saying no to those who think they can buy people. Each view is a light shining against abuse of power. And I need this message to reach every corner of this world. I need it to reach that girl being blackmailed today, That boy being humiliated today, that child who needs to know they can report it. And leave me a comment with the word dignity. Just that, dignity. So I know you watched until the end, that you understood the message, that you'll carry this in your heart. Do it now. Don't wait another minute. Because someone needs you today. Someone needs this story today. And always remember, you are never, ever for sale.